What is going on, everybody? This is Josh back again with another video on Tech and Ish. Now, today's video is going to be about Impulse. It's a YouTube original TV show, and season 2 was just released maybe yesterday. I just finished the whole season today, and this one was actually pretty good. Season 1 was a good season, and season 2 continues to be a good season. Now, just like any other show, you know, the beginning ends up being good, and then it kind of slows down towards the middle, but then at the very end, it just picks right back up, and it was really good. It does end off like on kind of like a cliffhanger, but you know, I think it could have ended off a little bit better. So if you don't want to hear any spoilers, you should turn off this video because I'm about to drop a lot of them off. So episode 1 of season 2, it picks up right where season 1 left off. You have Bill, who's pointing the gun at Henry and her mom, and he's basically telling her to show him her abilities. And I guess she just can't do it off demand like that because obviously she's not knowing how to control it yet. Basically what happens is she rips off his hand or his whole arm, takes it with her to wherever the hell she goes, and it kind of just ends off like that. Like, you don't even know what's going on. But with season 2, right where it picks off, it ends up showing a different camera angle, which is Nikolai. Nikolai is that guy who's been hunting a lot of teleporters, trying to capture them, because it'll get more into that story of why he's doing it. So it gets a camera angle of him, of how he sees it, and it's actually pretty cool the way it's being shown. It shows Henry grabbing the gun, it rips his arm off, and then he like flies up into the ceiling and hits it, ends up hitting like a table and then falls down, and you just see him right there on the floor. It's pretty gory because you actually can see like the whole arm just like completely gone. It shows all the meat from like down here. It's nasty. Nikolai just basically grabs him, takes him into a barn, and he's basically dissolving his body. I guess he's using some type of acetone, and he's just dissolving the whole thing. Henry ends up coming back into the picture. She's basically trying to like calm herself down from where she left off on season 1, because as I said, she was somewhere. She ends up calming down. She's able to make it back home, and she sees her mom basically dying, and she sees how Nikolai is there dissolving the body. They basically just play off this whole story on how Bill was trying to kill the mom, that she ended up driving them both. He ends up running out of gas because Nikolai took all the gas out of there. He ends up running out of gas, and then from there he just panicked and decided to go to the Canadian border. So that whole first episode kind of just relies on that story. It kind of relies on how Henry is able to make it sound convincing, because if she doesn't make it sound convincing, then her ass is on the line, and so is her mom. So that whole episode just revolves around that. Some of the things you end up getting from that first episode is Nikolai is able to control his abilities. He knows how to control them, and it looks like he's trying to show Henry how to control them as well. She's obviously not doing that good because she's still new to it, but she's kind of getting a grasp of it, but not that good. So from that first episode, you can actually tell Henry is dealing with the death of Bill pretty hard, because in a sense, she basically killed him. I mean, she didn't get rid of the body, but at the fact that taking his whole arm off was the result of him actually dying. So she's basically a murderer, and she's actually dealing with that pretty hard. She's, you know, doing drugs, trying to take her mind off of it. She's going to parties, and she's kind of like hallucinating a lot of things happening. So, I mean, that first episode it was just all of that happening to Henry. A lot of things to handle. So Impulse for season 2 was actually pretty good. I kind of want to just talk about some of the main points that caught my attention that I actually thought were very important when you're trying to get into this show. A lot of things were happening. Some certain episodes you actually had to pay attention to them, because if not, you're going to be completely lost. You're not going to know what's going on or why this is even happening. So you got to pay attention to certain things, but it's a good show to watch. So now, if you remember Towns, it's basically Henry's friend. He ends up getting hacked on his computer. He ends up getting a message from some guy. He's basically wanting to know what he knows about Henry, or what he knows about the teleporters. That's kind of what they're calling them, because they basically can teleport from one location to another. And he ends up hacking his computer, and he's basically telling them a bunch of stuff on how he wants to meet him. He's kind of like very secretive on certain things. He kind of tries to stay off the grid because a lot of his friends have died, and he's trying to make sure that the hacker is trying to make sure that he's not going to be one of those people that ends up dying as well from the hands of Nikolai, who ends up killing basically everybody. The hacker ends up leaving a VHS tape on his front doorstep, on Town's front doorstep, and that VHS tape basically shows kind of like experiments. Now, there's other teleporters out there, and it looks like Keto, which was like the guy who ran the whole thing, he was basically doing experiments on these teleporters, and there was a videotape of that. It doesn't really show anybody being tortured, but you can kind of hear them in the background of them screaming, and then somehow they teleport back to that same room, and it looks like they got blood on their back. So it looks like they're being tortured, but you can't see anything about it. So Nikolai is basically trying to help Henry control the impulse, basically. Try to make sure that she doesn't teleport to certain things, because when she does, she ends up like taking whoever's there with her, and she destroys a lot of things. So he's trying to, it looks like in the beginning, he's trying to train her. I didn't know if he was like a turned good guy or something like that. So it looks like he's basically just trying to train her, and he's telling her how to control certain things. So when Nikolai ends up teleporting from one location to another, he ends up giving himself a shot. Now, in the beginning, you don't really know what that shot is for, but I think it kind of explains it on why he ends up taking it. But it doesn't explain like what was the reason for him to take it. Like, does he teleport so many times that your body can't handle it, and that's why you need that shot? So I really don't understand that part of it, because it didn't go into much detail. Even towards the very end, it didn't go into much detail of why that actually happens. And he didn't even tell Henry about it either. So, but he does end up taking some shots like on his leg, and that kind of takes away, it looks like he's getting like jitters or something like that. He's shaking a lot. He basically looks like an addict. And once he takes that shot, he's basically like this whole brand new person. Now, if you remember from season 1, Lucas ended up killing one of like the Amish people's sons, and he basically went over there to, it looks like he was trying to make amends. I don't know if he was trying to sacrifice himself, but he basically gave them a lot of money, and it looks like he was trying to sacrifice himself, trying to do something right, because he's just tired of doing wrong. But it turns out that, you know, they're basically making him dig his own grave. They give him a gun and tell him to, you know, if you want to kill yourself, go ahead and kill yourself. But these Amish people are extremely religious, that they believe in second chances, they believe in forgiveness, and they kind of let him live in their whole village. And I actually thought that Lucas was going to end up staying there, trying to make a life for himself. But it doesn't really work out that way towards the end. But I just thought that, you know, it was kind of weird that, you know, he killed their son, but yet they were still letting them live there. Now, of course, there is people who live in that village who kind of give him the stank look, but he kind of just like turns a blind eye to it. Now, Jenna and Henry are basically talking to each other. They're trying to figure out if they should actually go to the cops and tell them what's going on. And they try to talk to Sheriff Ann about it. But right whenever she's talking to them, you end up seeing Nikolai come out of her office. And he tries to play this insurance claim guy who is the insurance people for Bill. And right when they see that, they end up realizing that no matter what they try to do, Nikolai is going to be around. So they decide not to even tell the cops anything of what happened to Bill. They're going to leave the story the way it was played out. They're going to leave it that way. Now this scene was actually pretty cool because Nikolai is telling Henry that he's going to train her. He's basically setting out some ground rules that he's going to train her. She needs to listen to every single word he says, and she kind of doesn't abide by it. She ends up taking a stun gun out and she shocks him, and within those whole shots he starts jumping from place to place to place. It looks really cool the way they actually made this look, but you know, as he's jumping from place to place, it takes a lot out of him. Like, he ends up kind of like stepping aside for a little bit, takes a big deep breath, and he gives himself another shot. So it looks like every single time he ends up jumping from another place, he always needs a shot right afterwards. But the reason why Henry did this is because she wants to make sure that he knows that there's going to be some ground rules on this shit. So if you want to help me out or you want to train me, you need to understand that I'm going to do it my way, and basically you're going to have to listen to what I have to say. Now, there is this one episode that you do have to pay attention to, and it's episode 4. Now, the main reason why is because it revolves all around Nikolai. Now, it doesn't talk about how he got the powers. I don't think throughout this whole season anybody knows how they got the powers, but he ends up being like a teenager. And he has his own family. He has a little brother and a mother and father. They end up going to this church, and out of nowhere, a lot of guns start being shot, and an explosion happens. He ends up seeing his little brother, and his little brother's like 5 years old, maybe. At the oldest is 8, but he ends up seeing his brother. That explosion ends up happening, and then somehow he just teleports back to his house. Now, at his house, his uncle is there. His uncle ends up seeing that whole thing, so now he knows that he can teleport. But of course, Nikolai doesn't know how to use it yet because he's still trying to figure it out. But one of the main reasons why I say you have to pay attention to this one is because throughout the whole episode, they end up speaking Russian. So you're going to have to read a lot of subtitles. You'll end up hearing some English words because there's this one character. I can't remember his name, but I know his name in real life is Shannon Cook. He ends up playing Monty's son on the 100. So he's in this episode just for a little bit, and it looks like he's trying to find his way back to Canada, and he kind of works with Nikolai to try to get some money. That way they can try to pay the smugglers to actually make their way back to Canada. Now, Shannon Cook basically has a rich father, which is Keto, and his sister. Those are actually 2 people that you'll end up seeing throughout this whole season, and what they end up doing with these whole teleporters. So as I mentioned, they're trying to smuggle their way back into Canada. They end up stealing a bunch of people's things so they can try to sell it for money, because it looks like they have to pay a lot of money for this. So the uncle ends up double crossing them. He ends up taking the whole money to himself. He tries to get on that smuggler's van or truck or whatever it was. He tries to get on it. Nikolai is able to get there just in time, pulls him off of it. He pays the smuggler double to let him and Shannon Cook into that truck, and he tells him don't allow his uncle in there. Now, as they're driving off, I didn't pay no mind to it. I'm thinking, okay, he's finally gonna get into Canada and he's gonna be able to live in basically in his own realm, because Russia was really bad. But it ends up turning out that I don't know if it was like the Russian government. They end up finding out the smugglers were driving in a certain direction. They pull them over, take everybody out, and they're about to shoot everybody. Nikolai ends up getting in the way of a gunshot, and he ends up kind of like giving a hug to Shannon, and they teleport back to Nikolai's house. Now I thought, okay, finally he knows how to teleport it. Maybe he knows how to control it a little bit more, and he ends up finding a way to get him and Keto. His last name is Keto. He ends up finding a way to get him and Keto out of Russia by teleporting. But his uncle is at that house, and he ends up shooting Keto right there in his back. And you end up kind of putting 2 and 2 together, that he was the one who actually probably called the Russian government, telling them about this whole smuggling thing, and that's why they got caught. Nikolai gets pissed, and he starts just beating him up. He ends up grabbing a metal piece, and he ends up just wailing on him. Now, one important part that you have to remember about this is that as Nikolai is training Henry, the reason why Henry continues to teleport back to her house is because that is like a safe zone for her. Now, when Nikolai was doing all of this, the reason why he kept on going back to his home was because that was a safe zone for him. But ever since he ended up killing his uncle at that safe zone, it kind of like broke a barrier, and he can no longer go to that safe zone again because like it makes it seem like it's no longer available, in other words. So that breaking a barrier kind of thing, it ends up being important towards the end. So as you continue watching this show, you end up realizing that Nikolai is basically training Henry because they're doing some type of experiment and they need her to do that. And I think the whole main reason why is because of her father dying, and maybe they're trying to do something to reverse that. But it does show a clip where there is this guy who was teleporting a huge object, or he was teleporting something, but somehow his body fused with that object, so it wasn't working as well. So that's why they continue to grab these teleporters. They experiment on them, making sure that they're able to do something like this. And that's why Nikolai is actually training Henry. So as you end up continuing to get more into the season, you end up seeing Nikolai, how he actually hunts people down. And he ends up telling Henry about this place that they're trying to keep her captive. He takes her to it, and it basically looks like her room. But in reality, it's not. It's basically just this whole room that they created. That way, when they want to experiment on her, that's where they're going to leave her at. But he's telling her that he doesn't want to do it. So I'm thinking in the beginning he was trying to help her, but then you find out in reality he's doing it because they're trying to run experiments on him. But then he takes her to that room and tells her, I'm not trying to do this. So then I end up thinking, okay, maybe he's finally done with killing all these teleporters. Maybe he's turned over a new leaf and he's trying to do things right. So from the get-go, Sheriff Anna, I can't remember which one it was, but she is not believing Henry's story. She's basically thinking that she's lying. She doesn't understand why, but she's kind of getting a lot closer to realizing why she's actually lying about it. And I'm thinking Nikolai figures that out. He also ends up realizing that Sheriff Ann is investigating him as well, because he doesn't seem like an insurance claim guy. It looks like he's something else. So he ends up doing something where he's laying down on, it looks like a highway or a main road. Sheriff Ann is driving. She pulls over. She sees him there. She tries to walk up to him, try to help him out, and he disappears. He ends up going into her car, and he tries to drive it towards her. Now she's basically shooting at him, and she jumps off the highway or basically jumps off the side of the road to make sure she doesn't get hit. And the car just ends up crashing into a pole. Now, people are thinking that she is crazy at this point because there's no evidence of anybody being in that car. There's no evidence of a person being on the floor. So it looks like she was just shooting her own car as it's being, crashed into a pole. So now they're making it seem like she's a crazy person, and they actually end up like suspending her or firing her because she's no longer going to be a sheriff with that department since all of this stuff is happening to her. So as you remember, Nikolai ended up killing his uncle, and from there he ends up finding Keto's dad. Keto's dad ends up taking him in at a young age, and he basically experiments on him on try to understand this whole teleport thing. And you should see the way he treats his daughter in this whole season. Nikolai's father, which is Keto, he ends up treating his daughter really bad. It pays no mind to her unless she does what he's interested in. Then he actually gives her some attention. But he treats her really bad throughout this whole season, and Nikolai seems like he's finally fed up with it. He ends up killing him by putting some, it looks like some medicine in a syringe, and he puts it in his IV, and he ends up dying. Now, the daughter does not take this lightly. You can hear her screaming in the background, and she's basically hating Nikolai after this. Now, if you remember that hacker, the one who hacked into Town's email or computer, he ends up being killed. Nikolai ends up realizing that that hacker is trying to talk to Henry, and he's getting really close to revealing a bunch of secrets. So he finds him, since he's coming out in the open. He finds the hacker, and he ends up killing him. But that hacker had kind of like a safety net. He ended up sending an email to Towns with all of his information. He gave him like a storage room that had one box in there that has everything that he knows about the whole teleports. With that box that he ended up receiving from the hacker, I think he's going to be able to understand the teleporters a lot better and see if he can actually help other people. So since Nikolai killed his supposed dad, Keto, now, they can't get no more of that drug. It turns out that the only way they're able to get that drug is from teleporters. Now, when they find those teleporters, I don't know if they take it from their blood or when they die, they're able to take it from some part of their body. But whatever drug he ends up getting from them, he uses it on himself, which is that shot. And that's how he's able to get about his day. But now that the dad is dead, there's no point in hunting the teleporters, as he mentioned. So the daughter is still pissed that she ends up kind of like kidnapping him a little bit, puts him in the middle of a room, and she used like a high frequency remote control kind of thing that plays a high pitched voice. And it looks like that's the only thing that stops them from moving anywhere. Like they can't do nothing. So she's basically torturing him there just for a little bit so he can actually feel what she's feeling since he killed her father. So the cops are getting closer and closer on trying to figure out the whole Henry story of what happened to Bill. And Henry is panicking. So she decides to talk to Lucas, tells Lucas if he can make up a fake lie saying that he saw his father and he's okay. He basically just wants to stay off the grid. And Lucas decides to change the whole story. He ends up turning himself in, saying that he's the one who actually killed his father. That way they can stop investigating and leave the whole thing alone. And Jenna did not like this at all. Jenna's been on Henry's ass so much, saying that everything's her fault, that she's getting bad grades, that she's falling so far down that nobody's like, it's basically her fault that's why all of this stuff is happening. And somehow Henry told Lucas to do this, but in reality she didn't. Lucas is only doing this because he considers Henry an angel since he became really religious. So Sheriff Ann ends up figuring out the whole thing that happened with Bill. The only reason why is because of Clay. Clay ends up saying that the reason why these whole teleporter things are happening is because of Henry. Henry ended up saving his ass on season 1, and instead of being grateful, he basically just throws her under the bus and starts telling Sheriff Ann all of this stuff on she's able to do this whole teleporting thing. Now, Henry is panicking by now. She ends up seeing Sheriff Ann in her barn where they actually got rid of Bill's body, and she tells her, talk to me, tell me what's going on. Henry is panicking. So she ends up grabbing her. They end up teleporting to this faraway place. It's like it's inside of a cave, but there's this huge waterfall. She leaves her there. She leaves Sheriff Ann there for some time, and she goes back. Now, by this time, she's trying to call Nikolai to see if he can help her somehow. But he's basically unreachable at this time because of what's going on with him and his sister or stepsister. Now, throughout the whole season, Nikolai has been lying to Henry. He's been telling Henry that her father is alive. And you kind of believe it because throughout the whole season, you end up seeing that she's actually talking to her father. But it turns out the only reason why is because it's kind of like a dream that she's having. She ends up continuing to go to his cabin in her dreams. And she wakes up and she's still at that cabin. So she somehow teleports there. She ends up figuring out how to teleport there just off of a feeling. But it turns out that he's been lying to her this whole time. He actually killed her father and buried his body at that cabin. That's why she continues to dream about him at that cabin. Henry does not take this news very well, and she starts beating him up really bad. She starts teleporting him, and he's already weak. He doesn't have that much, shots anymore. So he's already weak. She teleports him back to forth to a bunch of places. And it gets to the very end where she teleports him to kind of like a place that he's already been before. And he's trying to give himself a shot because he's basically not moving. His face is starting to crack, like if his body is like pulsing or something like that. He tries to give himself a shot. Henry takes it away and he basically dies from there. Now I thought it was going to be a huge explosion, but it looks like he just like dissolves or something like that. And it looked pretty cool the way they made it look, but I thought it was messed up that she didn't hear him out. But then again, I understand why she would do it. I mean, he killed her father, so come on. So now if you see it, Henry has already killed 2 people. And she ended up taking Sheriff Ann to that cave in the middle of nowhere. So she ends up talking to Towns and Jenna. She lets them know that her father is actually dead and she killed Nikolai. Now, she ends up talking about Sheriff Ann because Jenna ends up finding Sheriff Ann's cell phone in the barn. And she automatically thinks that Henry did something to the sheriff. Henry says that she ended up taking her to this cave and she left her there, but she's going to go back and try to fix this whole thing. Now, the messed up part is she goes back to that cave and the sheriff is no longer there. It looks like she was trying to escape, but she fell. And if you see this whole thing, this is a far drop. So I think that she's dead, but if she's somehow able to make it, maybe she ends up losing like her memory and she doesn't know where she's at. And she might end up coming out in season 3 if it does get renewed. Now, this whole thing is happening to Henry. She's losing her friends because of all the stuff that she's doing. And she's figured her mom is safe. But in reality, her mom will never be safe because no matter what, every time something happens to Henry, she always ends up going back to her mom because that's her safe zone. So if you remember what Nikolai did to his uncle on killing him, breaking that safe zone thing, she kind of does the same thing with her mom. Now, she doesn't kill her, but she goes in on her. Like, she starts telling her hella shit of how she's all messed up on, she's tired of moving from place to place, how her mom is pathetic. She like just tells her mom off. There's a lot of stuff that's happening that she tells her. It's just pretty bad. The mom finally just tells her, you know what, get out. I never want to see you again. She gets out of the house and she teleports. Now, when she teleports, that Amish lady whose son died, she ends up seeing that. And now she believes that she's an actual angel as well. So we get to the very end. Henry is all by herself. And it looks like she's in Rome, like the same place that Nikolai took her. She ends up meeting a friend of her father's. And it's this girl. And it looks like she's able to stop time. It looks pretty cool. But the lady ends up telling Henry that she started this whole new mess. And that's basically where it left off. It's basically a cliffhanger from there. Now, as I mentioned, this show is actually really good. You should go check it out. If you haven't seen season 1, season 1 is really good. You should definitely check it out. So I'll leave you guys with my usual disclaimer. If there's something else you want me to watch, let me know. There's a lot of things I still got to catch up on. I got a huge list. I put everything on pause because I wanted to finish Impulse. So a lot of things are still coming up. I just got to watch them. So comment, like, subscribe. Let me know if there's something you want me to look at. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.